So let me say welcome to you all. And as we continue to celebrate the college in print, we turn from the printed books and works of our alumni. Our last event, our first event of this year, when Francine Stock interviewed the author William Boyd. Today, we're looking at the written history of the college itself. And we're fortunate to be joined today by the editor and some of the major contributors to the college history compiled for the 450th anniversary. A really sumptuous and outstanding compilation of the college's history. I'm proud to have it here. I'm holding it up, my copy. It's been a great read. It really is wonderfully and lavishly illustrated. And it stands in an interesting contrast to the earlier histories. This is Baker's from 71 and good old Hardy's, Principal Hardy's from 1899, which has some, I have to say, very wry comments and wonderful comments on the college history. But I think as a comprehensive history, this version, the book we're talking about today, really does set an extraordinary standard. So I'm delighted now to introduce Professor Patricia Clavin to host today's session. Patricia is the Zeitlyn Fellow and Tutor in History here at Jesus College and is also Professor of International History. She's a Fellow of the British Academy and of the Royal Historical Society, and is a foreign member of the Norwegian Academy of Science and Letters. It's a huge delight to hand over the proceedings to you, Patricia, and thank you for convening today's session.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm very excited to have the honour of chairing the launch of this beautiful new book. I mean, it's, for those of you that have seen it, it's absolutely gorgeous, I think. It's very modern. It has a thematic and chronological structure that enables you to dip in and out. It's extremely lively and engaging. And so let me introduce you to the editorial and main author team, really, and our archivist, whose work has underpinned so much of its production. And for quite a long time, while we were still meeting in college, we would regularly see them all huddled together having lunch and then moving off. So hopefully we'll have that the opportunity to do that once again once we're out of this situation. Felicity Heal probably doesn't need much of an introduction to many of you. My colleague here for many years is a specialist in Reformation Britain. She studied at Cambridge and taught in Sussex before coming to Jesus. And she's, of course, an extremely experienced author and editor, having written many books on the economic problems of Tudor bishops, on hospitality in early modern England, and on the gentry. And she's, other than acting as the lead author and editor on this volume, her recent publications focus on the theme of gift giving and social exchange, which I'm sure is one of the themes that, well, I know is one of the themes that features in the book. Colin Haydon is a Jesus alumnus and read for a BA in modern history and then a DPhil at Jesus. He has published widely on the history of Britain in the 17th and 18th centuries, and especially on the religious history of the period. And for those of you that were taught by John Walsh, of course, Colin was one of his research students. He's a fellow of the Society of Antiquaries and the Royal Historical Society. Colin Bosworth, I asked everyone how they would like to be introduced, and Colin Bosworth's opening sentence was, "I was rather out of field as a historian of the college." I have to say, I don't think that's true at all. It doesn't come across in any way, Richard. His normal focus is modern Italian history, and his next book in that regard is on Mussolini and the eclipse of Italian fascism, which is due out with Yale in March, so not quite next month. And under lockdown, he's still managing to research and write now on the Amendolas, which he describes as a study of purist liberal democratic saint and martyr father and his humane and communist bourgeois son. It's a bit, sorry, I couldn't quite get that across in one go, Richard. And then finally, our wonderful archivist, Robin Darwall-Smith, who studied as a classicist at UNIF, both as an undergraduate and postgraduate, and has been an archivist there since 1993. He's also been an archivist of Magdalen College, but joined Jesus in 2016 and was then commissioned to work as part of the team. He's also quite remarkably really, part of a team writing a 3-volume history of All Souls College, and has worked on the histories of UNIF and on Magdalene. So he has a unique perspective to set Jesus in a comparative setting. And through this work and other many, Robin has really wide-ranging interests, has become a specialist in the history of Oxford much more broadly, writing also on the 20th century history of music in Oxford, and thematic collections of documents and essays also relating to George and Oxford. So that's enough from me. Nigel has very kindly introduced the sort of format. We welcome questions in the chat either as we go along. I'll try and keep up with those, but also more formally after about 30 minutes or so, 25 minutes of discussion amongst the authors. And Felicity is very generously, as the lead editor, often to ensure that all of the questions that are asked will receive some answer, also because we're conscious that we don't have every single member of the author group here, particularly in relation to the sections in the book on the college treasures. Okay, so just so we can hear a little bit about, or something from all of our contributors. I mean, firstly, one of the things that I wondered about as a historical researcher is, what's the thing that really surprised you the most about what you uncovered, or the single discovery that excited you the most? So Felicity, what was it for you?
Right, could I take over from there? Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. I'll come back to the general issues of the college history later on. I think I do have an answer to this, and it's that I was very troubled when I started writing the early part of the history, that there is so little about the undergraduates. We know about the finances of the college, we know about the fellowship a bit, we know so little about the undergraduates. And I was therefore, in a way, delighted and intrigued to find that there is a case of manslaughter from the early 17th century, which is recorded in the university archives, which has one of the students, I think inadvertently, stabbing and doing down and killing one of the other students. But the really interesting thing for me was this sense that this was done in the environment of a chamber. There were 6 of them there. They were all planning, some of them to go to bed, some of them to sit by the fire and talk too much. There was chat about the relationship between freshers and those who were more senior. And just temporarily, it shone a light on the undergraduate experience in the very early days of the college, when things were very poor. They were all of them, most of them, with one exception, I think, were Welsh. And I've written this up in the book, but I wonder, I would love to know, were they speaking Welsh? Were they speaking English? Were they speaking, as they should have been, Latin? So that really was an intriguing incident.
Yeah, and fascinating the way you've just built that out, really, not just as a, because immediately I think, yes, the thing that we notice is the behavior of a bad student. That's an outrageous incident, and that's the thing that, but it's actually the way also that recreating the entire setting offers an opportunity to unpack so much more. So it's a wonderful example. Colin, what about you?
Well, the flippant answer is a growing detestation of J.R. Green, alumnus and Victorian historian. But the serious one is, I'm very interested in the balance between the fellows' abilities, particularly financially, and chance in the college's history. After the Civil Wars, Jesus was impoverished. Then it gets 2 major bequests in 1685 and in 1713. And from there, it operates very well. It can pay its fellows, and they're well paid in the 19th century. It pays its scholarships, it increases the number of exhibitions and provides for poor students. It keeps the buildings in good repair. It's worth remembering a Hertford building fell down in 1820. It expands the library. It invests prudently. But there's another side to this, and that's the element of chance, because it could have been different. The 1685 benefaction is from the rich landowner and former principal Sir Leoline Jenkins, but Jesus gets the bequest because he's a bachelor. The 1713 bequest is from Edmund Merrick, clergyman, former fellow, and landowner in Wales. And the college gets that bequest because his heir has died predeceasing him. So things might have been very different. Might the college actually have experienced enormous financial difficulties, not been able to operate properly, possibly even collapsed? Might it have been subsumed into another college? Might there be a bridge of sighs from Exeter into quadrangles which hadn't been completed? So I was interested in the balance between real ability in handling things, selling off property at good moments too, and an element of luck and what might have occurred.
That's a kind of a story of light and shade that you've drawn there, Colin, that in some ways is quite alarming in the world that we're living in now, I think, but we'll perhaps come back to that. Richard, what about you?
Well, I don't think that there's some single anecdote. There are probably only too many anecdotes in my chapter anyway, but to me what the surprise and the great pleasure of having to write this chapter was the archives, that I'd wanted to try to write a piece about Jesus from below, as it were, or at least from reasonably far below, particularly to try to find out what successive generations of students thought. And the archives really are rich enough to be able to do that. There are extensive minutes from the JCR, the Lizzies, the college magazines, often either published directly by the students or with students having great influence over it, are really rather wonderful. And so you can see attitudes on a whole series of matters, be it from how appalling the idea was in the 1890s that women might be thought equal or something or other, to views about the empire. Perhaps the most remarkable one actually was after the First World War, of started the Junior Common Room deciding that they were still rather sympathetic towards Germany, or at least didn't want Germany particularly badly treated. Perhaps that reflected something of what seemed to me the admirable internationalism of the principal of the college at that time, still John Rees, a marvelous man, I think. So in that sense, it was Stalin who I think called historians, and he wasn't being polite, archive rats. I was happy to find that I could look for cheese, as it were, in the Jesus archives in order to write this chapter.
That's wonderful, and a very nice way to also then introduce Robin as our archivist, and I think also, you know, great to have a social historian who has that sensitivity to it, because as you can see from Felicity's quest for materials in the earlier period, not necessarily available. So I don't know, Robin, whether it's a fair question to ask you whether there are discoveries there that surprise you, because in a sense you're in charge of the whole shooting match, but whether there's something in the set of materials that...
I suppose with the ultimate archive rat, I love that term. It's sort of, I mean, lots of stories, but there was one moment when I suddenly sat back in my chair and I thought, wow, I wanted to be there. I was looking, I mean, Richard's told you about the Jesus College magazines, and they include reports of the summer concerts we used to have when celebrity musicians came to us. And in the summer of 1914, Richard's great countryman, Percy Grainger, came to play the piano in the hall. And he played us some Bach-arranged Busoni. We got Ravel's Jeu d'eau and Le Gibet. We got some Debussy. We got some late Brahms piano pieces. And this is all modern stuff. I mean, even the Brahms is barely 20 years old in 1914. And he rounded off by playing us his arrangements of London and Shepherd's Hay. And the reviewer clearly found the Ravel and Debussy tough stuff. But he says that Grainger's own arrangements were vociferously encored. And Grainger was a great pianist, a bit of a showman, a bit sort of maverick. And I just thought I wanted to go back to 1914 and experience Grainger beating hell out of a piano in the hall. And that was a moment I thought, I love that. Grainger was here. So
yeah, that's wonderful. No, a wonderful, very, very particular discovery, Robin, and evocatively recreated for us. So at the beginning of our, our meeting today, Nigel waved in front of us the new sumptuous college history and contrasted it very immediately with the older ones. I wonder, Felicity, whether you could sketch that out for us a little bit more for those that haven't had the chance to see the new book yet.
Right. Well, thank you very much. I realise that some people will have got copies, some will not yet have got them, but let me sort of work on the principle that I'm trying to explain here why we did things this way. What's different? Well, a century has passed, more than a century has passed, since the admirable Hardy account of the college, and half a century, of course, since Baker did his for the 400th anniversary. They both of them have the characteristic of being essentially linear histories, chronologically covering the range of materials that are available for the college and covering them pretty well, although in very different ways and styles, I think. Hardy, if anybody was wanting to go back and really look at the general institutional history of the college, there's still much to commend the Hardy account. It has a great deal about the endowments, perhaps too much to my mind, but in other ways it's a wonderful account of what has happened in the college. Baker perhaps works slightly less successfully in that sort of way. But obviously what we sought to do was to start over again, really. We started over again, and this I think you can probably pick up already from the words that have been said by my colleagues. We started over again in working back to the archives and into connected sources that are highly relevant to the college. So in that sense, it's a new account. And it has, in its main chapters, a chronological approach broadly to the college history. But we were also very aware that this was different. This should be different in that it wasn't really simply or mainly a narrative. It was an analysis of the various phases of the history of the college. And in some ways, there was discussion at an earlier stage about should we call it a portrait of the college. I hesitate. I'm not greatly fond of the term portrait here, but I think in some ways that's what some of the chapters were aiming towards, as well as towards a chronological account of what was going on. It is a portrait of the community of the college, both in the past and in the present. And I would sort of stress that past-present connectedness here, which really is not there in the same way in the older histories. It's a portrait of some of the treasures, the portraits themselves, the architecture, the general nature of the college. And I deliberately called the last section the community of the college, although it covers chronologically some things that go well back into the late 19th century and some things that are simply about the last 20 years. What I think I and my colleagues were aspiring towards here was providing a sense of what the college as a community has been and how that has changed. Perhaps a greater emphasis on students. Richard has already mentioned this. I felt this too. There should be a greater emphasis on students and undergraduates than there had been in the earlier histories. Maybe less emphasis on endowments, important though those were, as Colin has shown in his introduction. More of a concern for what is happening in the college on a daily basis. We were also, of course, dealing with pictures. You've already said that it's a...
Yes, there's a very striking, sorry,
Yes.
I didn't mean to talk over you, but there's a very striking, you know, the second part two, places and treasures, is quite a different formulation to the way that historians in the past might have treated.
Yes, yes. I mean, perhaps that's partly because historians are now much more interested in material culture than they were once upon a time, but we felt that it fitted very well with this past and present sense of what the college is. And we were very lucky in that we had specialists, Sue Doran and Caroline Stanford, writing on key issues there. And they're not able to be joining us today, but they will answer questions if they are put through the system. So that was part of it. But in order to have the lovely pictures, and in order to have that sense of the portrait of the college in past and present, we did have to make a few sacrifices. The most obvious sacrifice, which I think my colleagues are still suffering under, as it were, is that we didn't have a footnoted text here. And historians hate, but hate, not having footnotes. As you will gather, we have in the introduction said that we are going to provide a footnoted version, just of the text, not of the pictures, which will be eventually, and I stress, I think, rather strongly here, eventually, put up on the college system so that people can, if they really want to do something in depth, pick that up by that route. But we did, for these purposes, decide that it was the words of the text that counted, and we would provide evidence at a later stage of how that really was going to connect with the research, the very extensive research that was done on all the chapters. A few other sacrifices. We have less, I think, on the alumni than perhaps some colleagues might think desirable. We are concerned mainly with a focus on what happened in the college when people were here, but we haven't intended, therefore, to neglect the interest of the alumni. And again, we can answer questions about the ways in which the present of the particular generation of the college fit with the alumni and their experience. I think I better stop at that point, otherwise we're not going to get through the hour with everybody having a chance to speak. But there's obviously a lot that could be said about structure and approach. And we did have fun, I should add.
Well, that's wonderful to hear, especially as there's always the final moment as you're pulling a text together where you have to make the difficult decisions about what goes out. I think that's always one of the challenges of being a historian, really. It's not what you put in, it's a lot of the struggle is what people see, which is what you have to cut away. If I can see some questions are beginning to come in, I would encourage others to type them into the chat. Let me turn to Colin and Richard, who both wrote, substantive chapters in the first part of the text and the historical. I suppose a little bit more of the linear type of material that Felicity was alluding to. Colin, in your opening remarks, you did underscore the importance of chance, but also the kind of financial history, and I suppose that relates a little bit to the period that you're working on, where educational institutions and the state and the place of religion too is shifting. How does your chapter open up new perspectives on students and student life in the college?
Well, when Felicity initially asked me to write my chapter, which goes from 1688 to 1871, of course I instantly accepted, and then I thought afterwards probably this was not terribly wise. I didn't know whether the sources were really there for this kind of work, and I have read, I might say, an awful lot of very bad institutional histories, but of course there is enough. The problem is that sources are uneven and therefore things go in and out of focus. So just to say something about the students. Regarding the students, we don't really know that much about individuals, but of course, some do come into focus because of after they left the college, we know more about famous people. But we don't really know that much about the individuals. But you can be lucky. We have a diary from a man called John Jones, who came up in 1792 as an undergraduate, left in 1796, and his diary, which Robin recently acquired for us, gives a good deal of information. It tells us what he read as an undergraduate. It tells us what he held as regards his religious beliefs and his political affiliations. It also tells us about his social life, and notably in 1794 on St. David's Day, he goes out and gets, as he puts it, very drunk, and the next day he records that he was very sick. So sometimes you can actually home in on a particular individual. J.R. Green, who I mentioned earlier, undergraduate in 1850s. We've got a lot on his life at Jesus, and also on just how much he utterly detested the college, which is the theme that runs through it. And we've also got more from diversity archives and also our own archives, particularly on students who fall foul of the authorities and therefore a case is effectively put up against them. But the other thing which I think I would say about students is that for the period I've looked at, you don't just necessarily want to focus in on individuals, but it's more interesting in many ways to focus in on them collectively or as in groupings. And it's possible to do this, not least because we've got alumni university lists from 1500 to 1886, but one of our graduate students has wonderfully created a database of those who went to Jesus, and it is now possible to fish out lots of information very easily. For instance, where did the students come from? Well, in my period, the county which sent the greatest number of students was Denbighshire. So this is easily retrieved now, and that's great. But also using the database and other records is very useful to be able to track things like social background. And one of the things which really comes out to me is that in Oxford terms, in the period I'm studying, this is very much a plebeian college. Rich Welsh families tended to send their sons to English public schools, increasingly so. Then they went off to colleges which were more fashionable. But I think here Jesus is acting very creditably because it uses its scholarships and particularly its exhibitions, and it creates more of these, increases their value from the Merrick Fund to fund students who are poor. By the 1850s, after their first year, most undergraduates are actually getting some form of subsidy from the college. And the Dons are very proud of this. They say that they are very pleased that they are supporting what they call Welsh Popores students. And the last point I'd make about students is that this bears on academic standards, because it was often said that Jesus was a weak college academically in the Victorian period. Now, if you look at the 19th century records, one of the key touchstones is clearly the records of graduation. And from 1807, what you've got is a set of honours degrees with classes. So the outstanding students are getting first, and this is recorded. And when you look at Jesus's results, then it falls down there. It's not doing that well. But I think you need to look at this a little more carefully, because when one looks at who actually was getting first in the Victorian period, and before, overwhelmingly, they come from the leading English public schools, and indeed a mere 6 of them. And of course, the feeders for Jesus College are the Welsh grammar schools. And in the 19th century, they are not performing terribly well, as indeed one of the principles of Jesus emphasizes. And so I think that they found it very hard to compete against those who had had superlative educations at the best English public schools before. And 2 things also arise out of that. One, that although Jesus students tend not to do well in classics, they do much better in mathematics and science, because their natural aptitude trumps long saturation, which was really needed to do tremendously well in the exams later on at Oxford. And it's also worth noting that one of the keys to success in examinations in the 19th century was private coaches. And Jesus members' Jesus students really can't afford those. Only a handful of them are affording them in the 1850s, unlike in Christchurch, where it's very easy to afford these people. So in that sense, I think that when one looks at the students collectively, one gets a rather different picture. And yes, they aren't doing that badly.
That's wonderful, Colin. And it comes across, you know, you've captured it fabulously, and it comes across beautifully in the chapter. And I think it's a strikingly modern story. I mean, that's what surprised me really in the telling of it, because we now would stress value added elements of education, so that students' background. And I think the other thing that you bring out is really the importance of, or the insights that prosopography brings to this, or enables us to bring to this kind of social history. And I mean, I can't resist, because it's come into comment on the chat, and it came into mind too. For those of you that don't know, the History Society, our student history society, is the J.R. Green History Society, the oldest running history society in Oxford. And Phil Lovell has no, it's not Phil, somebody else has commented. Is it Tim, wasn't it? Time to rename the J.R. Green History Society, and I'm slightly the same thought had rather crossed my mind too. Richard, you've been working on the 20th century part of the text and a little bit into the 21st century. How, I mean, is your story one of continuity from Colin's, or, you know, how does you mentioned the advent of women undergraduates and how that I mean, obviously marks a striking change in the college's composition. Is it a kind of, Colin's drawn quite a positive and very modern presentation of the plebeian college that, you know, I think in the 21st century is something we should be very proud of. How does that fit with the 20th century?
Yes, I'll try to be very brief, because we must leave time for questions. I guess if one had to note what was the great change in the new history as compared to Baker or I'm blocking his name, Hardy's ones, then there were no women in their histories, because there were no women, or the women who were here were disguised in very menial roles as servants and so on. And that change from 1974 onwards was obviously a massive one. I mean, a modest half of the population suddenly became possible participants in the Jesus story in the way they hadn't been before. And it's all the nicer that Felicity is the editor of this volume, this woman who arrived as one of the very, very first dons in 1980. She almost coincides with Jesus anniversaries. And in that regard, can I digress, as it were, for a moment and make an appeal to people who are listening and watching now, and will do later. And that is, for goodness sake, all of you at once get down and write your own memories of what it was like being here, and pass them over to Robin, who will preserve them. And then when we get to the 500th anniversary of the college, which ideally won't occur during some coronavirus attack in 2071, perhaps we can have the principal used the word comprehensive about the history. Well, the history is never comprehensive, but maybe in 2070 it could be even more comprehensive. I suppose if I had to select my favorite student, though, the gender question might be a bit ambiguous. Well, it would have to be a boy, really, because it might be the student called A. Goldfish, who was elected president of the Junior Common Room during 1968 and all that at the college. It's an interesting matter, because his name, and I guess one must call him a male at the time, it was spelled A and then Goldfish, rather as Harry S. Truman is spelled Harry S. Truman, no full stop. But when Principal Habakkuk went through the college lists and tried to find A. Goldfish and then complained back to the JCR, he looked for somebody called A. full stop Goldfish, who actually, of course, wasn't relevant to what the JCR people were doing. And so the rhetorical battles of 1968 and all that could be fought out over that particular matter, Patricia. But I do think the students at Oxford, at Jesus, as revealed in the college archives, are not wildly unusual, but they do have unusual moments, and that's probably what's always true in history. And it is indeed those specific moments that, in a way, particularly interesting. And one does find, I think, overall, as Colin's really been saying, and Felicity, a humane college in the final essence of things, as well as one that has tried to be open. I talked before about Principal Rees, and he seemed to me to set a model really for the college to try to be open to the wider world. And perhaps in the memories collected for 2071, we will have more people from countries well beyond Britain, and or from people who live in Britain, but whose original family background is from places well beyond Britain. Certainly there have been people like that in the college. There were already before 1914. The man who, after all, was probably the first beginner of the African National Congress was here, as recorded in my chapter. And I think we must look for further evidence about those people as time continues.
Yes, I think that was very striking in your chapter, is the kind of global connectedness. You know, I mean, it's always a fragmented world. It's never completely joined up, but the international awareness of some of our students, and also the way that some of our students recognize particular qualities that the college offered that they felt comfortable with, I think, because of their the backgrounds that they brought. I can see lots of questions coming into the chat, so I think we need to get to those too. So just very quickly to bring Robin in, because I know his contribution was so central to the work that the historians have been able to do. Robin, there's been lots of sort of indicators to the unevenness of the material, and you and I are working at the moment in response to Richard's plea to the alumni, everybody on the call to write their memoirs. We're involved with the students and the history students taking the lead in collecting materials relating to this extraordinary year that we've experienced, not just COVID, but also all of the different types of campaigns, and that material will be archived in a different way. But I wondered, Robin, to ask you something slightly different, rather than a very broad question about the unevenness of the materials, whether you as an archivist understand the value of the materials in a different way to that of my historian colleagues.
Gosh, as it were, I wasn't expecting that one. So it's very hard to say. I'm sorry, I've lost the question because you.
No, that's all right. Don't worry. It was really because I think, yes, I'm just keen to bring everybody in. So I think, well, if you'd like to sort of make one reflection on the unevenness of the archives, because it comes up as a theme. Are they uneven?
Very uneven. I mean, two factors I've noticed. First of all, the record-keeping habit. Every college, all the four colleges I've looked at, have governing body records. But what do you put in governing body records? So at UNIV, they record every year who's elected for a college office, like bursaries. All Souls and Magdalen have lots and lots about estate business. Jesus is unfortunately the worst of the lot. It just records the elections and resignations of fellows and scholars. So for centuries, there's no hint of what's going on in the governing body of Jesus. Then there's sort of luck. Who keeps what when? And Felicity alluded to the fact that there's almost nothing for our first 30 years. Then that you get some little blips. In the Georgian period, there's a college butler who was a cousin of Principal Thomas Pardoe. And he was a great squirreler of stuff. His cousin's papers for other fellows, all put in a tin box. And so again, there's this blip in the 19th century. And Richard talked about the student records of the late 19th, early 20th centuries. Those are astonishingly good in Oxford. I mean, scholars who've been looking at student societies circa 1900 have come to me in the archives, and their jaws have dropped at the riches I can afford them, which they say really are unparalleled. So there is so much luck in what is kept, and so much question of what do you choose to record? So it's the record keeping habit. So those are sort of themes I can see.
Thank you, Robin. I'm just conscious of the time running away from us, and I think what you've alerted us to is really the danger of too much clearing out in lockdown. But those that do find themselves with time on their hands, now is the point to start squirreling away and thinking about what might be suitable for you to at least think of, soothing out the unevenness in the future. That we've among the questions that we've had, some of them do draw on or focus in on misbehavior of the students. So I suppose this does go to you all collectively. Can we say, this one from Tom Brown, can we say what the peak age was for bad behaviour by Jesus students based on the number of fines handed out by the college or university authorities or criminal convictions? Ah, yes, and Tom's made himself visible. I don't know whether that you have a personal interest in this question, Tom.
Well, indirectly. Person concerns will remain strictly anonymous, but in my last year, one of my fellow linguists was arrested and charged with being drunk and incapable by the Oxford police, and so found guilty indeed by the Oxford Crown Court. So one was aware of a certain level of misbehaviour in the second book.
I think this has to be a question more perhaps for the later period than the early one. I mean, we don't really have the evidence for my bit of territory. Pass it on happily.
Well, I mean, I certainly haven't done a specific tally of these matters. I simply recorded incidents in that regard as they came up. I guess one would have to say that despite a goldfish, that 1968 and the events that followed were actually rather mild in Oxford compared to many other university settings on the continent or in the United States or whatever. And it did, in a way, because it coincided with Principal Habakkuk talking to other college principals and beginning the processes which in 1974 would admit what he at that stage thought would be 25% of the students as female. It was rather coloured by that matter. I suppose the saddest story of student infringement that I know is the one that's recorded in my chapter from the 19th century about the boy who may or may not have been trying to seduce a serving girl across on the other side of Ship Street through his window. And he was simply moved to a room where he couldn't see out, basically, and she was sacked on the Monday morning. So there was rather a difference in the results of true love, if that's what it was, for a boy compared to a girl, a male compared to a female. The use of language, of course, in the period of women arriving in the college is very interesting, because words like girl and lady still are used, whereas men are called men. And it takes quite a long while before men and women are simply described in that manner.
Yeah, no, I'm sure Felicity can speak to that experience. I feel like
I go back to the record keeping habit. People didn't record this stuff in official college records. I mean, you can occasionally find cases, as Colin and Felicity have found, that the university courts sometimes get people hauled up before them, especially in the 17th and 18th centuries. But people just didn't record punishments very much. I noticed actually somebody was asking, do we have any evidence of how contentious the decision to admit women was? No one bothered to record that. There are governing body records, there are circulars, but that nice fellow of the early 70s would have sat down and kept a diary in which he talks about volcanic rows in the SCR, or maybe just everybody said, let's go for it. We don't have that.
Perhaps I could just pick up on the point about the admission of women, and it's quite true, as Robin says, that we don't have the formal record. So as we began work on the college history, I went back to my inevitable source for the long history of the college, which is John Walsh, and discussed many of these issues with him, and admission of women was obviously high on the list. John, I said, John, what was the real contention going on behind the scenes of the records that Robin has referred to? And John said, there wasn't any contention. It was all straightforward. We had by then decided it was a good idea, and we proceeded accordingly. Now, I'm devoted, as many listeners might know, if there are any historians online, to John and everything that he represents. But I think he's sometimes a little reluctant, even in personal record, to reveal what might have been argued or discussed. However, having said that, I think the admission of women did go through with very little fundamental contest within the college. And so sad that we haven't got a good record, but that's the way life is, and it's one of our great achievements.
I noticed in the chat there's some dispute about 1968 being mild, but it is one of these. It is a relative phenomena, because certainly I have had the experience of bringing historian colleagues in from elsewhere, where 1968 certainly in Germany and France had a bigger impact, and they just find it extraordinary that we still work in the historical space that we work in, because in those universities it was completely trashed, despite the occupations and things that went on. There's a question here, I suspect it might be another one from Brad Wilson, whether there's sufficient evidence, but it asks about what evidence, if any, exists for religious affiliation being a factor in admission of undergraduates, specifically in relation to the Elizabethan period and shortly afterwards. But I wondered more broadly how long that is a consideration.
Well, certainly in the early period, if we're dealing with the ordinary undergraduates, I don't think, and so the evidence is not there, basically, but I think infer from what we know about admissions in the university in the later Elizabethan period that it wasn't a question of severe test. Fellowship and scholarship members of the college would eventually have had to adhere to the Elizabethan settlement through the oath. And I think almost certainly this was not a college where the question of active Catholic presence is an issue. It's a college with a very, using the term loosely, a very high church policy from an early stage, which is reflected right through the 17th century, particularly in the period of the Civil War, but not, as far as we can tell from the very limited evidence, one where Catholicism as such, recusancy, that is to say, is of major significance or importance. For the later period, I mean, this affects obviously Colin's period as well.
Yes, I mean, it's a major issue in the 19th century because in order at matriculation, beginning of the 19th century, people coming up have got to subscribe to the 39 Articles of the Church of England. And this is a major issue, obviously, Jesus, because in the 19th century, dissent proliferates in Wales in a huge way. And possibly 3/4 of the population by the middle of the 19th century are dissenters. Are they being kept out of Jesus? Well, up until 1854, when the university relaxed the subscription rule for undergraduate degrees, very, very likely, and J.R. Green says that this continues afterwards, you're just keeping Protestant dissenters out from Wales, however able. What I would say is I think that there is evidence that, in fact, the situation was much more fluid than that, even before 1854, and that in Wales, families might attend both church and chapel, and therefore people who've been brought up as dissenters, and there is some evidence for this, then moved over and subscribed when they came to Oxford. So I don't think it's quite as cut and dried as one might initially expect. Could I just go back to the disciplinary question too? But I didn't say anything for my period. But what I think is very striking is there's not that much in the Jesus records about this, though sometimes students get thrown out simply because they're not attending. Where you look at the proctor's records, what is interesting to me is there aren't many Jesus cases who are brought up before the university proctors, but there is a change chronologically over what interests the proctors. In the 18th century, it's students who are getting into trouble and being riotous. In the 19th century, it's sexual misdemeanors.
Yes, I wondered about whether, sorry. Yes, yes, that's what I wondered about, whether really what the sources would tell you is not so much what the students are doing, but rather what they're interested in policing and the changing codes and norms around that. If I might take everybody back, there's an interesting question from Angela Jackson much earlier in the chat about policy evolving towards the principles remaining in post after getting married. And she gives examples of Jane Renstall, Thomas More's extended family, or Mary Houghton of Wavertree, and whether money was involved in enabling the principles to stay. Oh, I think Angela's asked a good question there.
Well, the obvious formal point is that principals can be married and the fellowship can't until the later 19th century. There is this sense that although not all principals were married, the majority are. It is an expectation. Money, I don't know. I don't think I have anything immediately that's useful to say on that. I notice that her question also includes questions about benefactions, benefactions from women to the college. Well, we do have one rather good early benefaction by a London grocer's widow, Mary Robinson, who left, by the standards of the period, £500, quite a lot to the college. But I don't think that shows through in the books or anything. That is simply endowment. I don't know if anybody else has anything on policy and marriage in the later period.
Not really. I mean, it's just this fact that there is this tension that if you're a fellow, if you marry, you're out on your ear. I mean, you might be given a bit of grace in that. But there are plenty of stories of fellows finding the woman of their dreams and then being left stranded until they can either get a decent living or become head of a college. And I mean, there are some colleges like Wadham where even the head of the college was forbidden to marry. So, I mean, there are little hints here or there in some of the other colleges I've looked at where the moment that someone becomes Master of Union or Principal of Warden of All Souls, they at last marry their lady love. That's very nice. Lady benefactors of the college, it's very much who bothered to record it. Again, is there a benefactors register that says that Lady X or Miss Y gave us this money? And often that's all you'll have. So it's this tale again of how little we have to go on. Sometimes.
It does change quite rapidly, doesn't it, at the end of the 19th century and then on into the 20th century. Excuse me. I suppose, I think one of the nicer college events is the Poulton dinner that we all go to in December each year, donated by the very distinguished scientist Poulton, because he ran into biscuit money in his marriage. But that was from the very beginning to try to have fellows and their wives to attend. And I think Jesus was quite advanced, really, in accepting the idea that fellows might be married. And it's another perhaps sign of the way the college does fit itself into the other colleges in that manner.
Yeah, I might say that I think the Jesus principles are well paid by the 19th century. They're doing very well, actually. And the government commission says, rather disparagingly, the principle of Jesus lives very much like a gentleman. And so he did in that household. In 1855, and I've got the list here, he has a butler, a lady's maid, cook, housekeeper, kitchen maid, coachman, and footman. So yes, this was very much a college where you rather saw, I think, the principal by then with his family and so forth. I might say on that, there is a diary which I haven't looked at in the National Library of Wales, which is of a maid of Sir John Rees, so principal from 1895 to 1915, and that for virtually the whole period. So that may be very interesting.
Sorry, Felicity.
Sorry, could I just add that, I mean, when you look at the architecture of the college, it's fairly obvious that for a college which, despite the happiness of the later 18th century when it became a bit more affluent, the college in general looks a bit modest, but the actual principal's lodgings look really rather fine. And that suggests from a fairly early stage a consciousness about status.
Once they built the great big Turl Street gate, you didn't enter the principal's lodgings by going through the college. You drove your carriage up through that gate. Sorry, I really interrupted you, Patricia.
Well, no, it was really the second part of Angela's question was also getting at women's ability to contribute to the intellectual life of the college before they were formally admitted. I mean, she asks it more specifically, but I wondered whether we could tease that out in the life of a gentleman more broadly. Anyway, the example in my mind was Principal Rees, with his wife and daughters being very active in the women's suffrage campaign, and whether there are any other examples of that sort of wider, you know, the kind of not just the romantic aspects, but that women in a salon culture would have had a made an impact.
I've got one thing. It's the wrong college. It's at UNIV. The niece of a master of UNIV spent several months with her uncle and aunt in 1810, 1811. So she actually got to meet Percy Shelley and thought he was half crazy. And you get the impression there wasn't really enough space for a salon culture because the only women in the university of the status were the spouses of heads of house. And actually, Elizabeth Grant, she writes very well, but she's quite hard-hitting. And she says that a lot of the women, members of heads of house, wives of heads of house, she said she found them rather dull. And she missed that sort of, she'd grown up in Edinburgh, and she was much used to that sort of more interesting salon culture. I think the change really happens when in the later 19th century, fellows are allowed to marry and keep their jobs. And then there really does become a salon culture in Oxford. I've just discovered this in a different field. I'm working on history of the Oxford Bark Choir, which is founded in 1896. And several of the founders are kind of Oxford power couples. So one of the key players is Reginald Lane Poole, great historian, and his wife Rachel, a great art historian. And you can see in the 1890s, there is now a world of sort of households, especially in Oxford, where there are women playing an important role in the intellectual and cultural life of the city.
I'm conscious that we're right up against the clock now. We've more or less run out of time. I think so there are specific questions in the chat about whether the early 20th century handwritten roll of college students will be made available digitally and so on. And I'm sure my colleagues and I will try and follow up on the specific questions of detail in due course. There's been a few more general reflections on the kind of format that the college historians, as you now are, and archivists would like memoir materials to be put together. And I think I suppose my final question and reflection to ball that up into a sort of single comment from you all would be also, if any of our current students are on the call, they were invited to join us. And I know they're actively putting together things for, as I've mentioned, for the archive collection of this last year, where there's also aspects of material life. So when we were talking about it amongst ourselves in the J.R. Green Society, the students had handmade masks that their mothers had made them, for example, with the college crest on them. So there's also material artifacts, and I wondered whether, other than writing memoirs, there's another way, or you know, what kind of other format might this material take?
I just very quickly, I'll pick up first on this one. I talked earlier on about John Walsh, and John in 1968 went round and collected all the ephemera from that revolutionary period, if such we think of it being. And he has accumulated that, and I believe it will eventually go to the Bodleian as part of their collections. And that, it wasn't so much actually making things, but accumulating things that would normally, like posters and the like, just disappear in ether. And I think that is valuable. And I'm going to just write on one other comment here. Please, we would love to have memoirs. Please, can some of the female students, please, please, please write memoirs. We had not a single memoir and things that were fed into us from one of our female students. And any of you who are listening now, please, much as we are devoted to having the male memoirs, and it's very important, I think we need some for the women as well.
Wonderful. So we have posters, we have female memoirs. Colin, anything else we should add into the pot?
You've taken me by surprise. I don't know. It partly depends what we've got already, doesn't it? You know, do we have a balance between, say, arts and sciences? I think that would be interesting to know. But no, you've taken me rather by surprise there.
That's all right. That's all right. I think I was wondering whether there was something. I know Robin will have answers. We've got yes, we've got. Pat, you're right about Black Lives Matter. That certainly animated some of our students. So they were thinking. In fact, what we will have is a lot of digital and visual material. That's what's very striking. Photographs and music. Richard.
I think, Patricia, if I may just say one thing, I think that in terms of people writing down something, and this is such a good moment to be trying to write down something, be brave. Don't think that you have to write about very obvious orthodox things, what lectures were like, etc., etc. Just almost anything, really, anything that really struck you while you're an undergraduate here. And in a way, it's the more unusual memories that I think are going to intrigue the historian for 2071, rather than the more predictable ones. So try to be unpredictable, I think.
Wonderful, thank you, Richard. And final word then to Robin.
Well, I'd back up all of that. And one thing to say is, of course, as an archivist, I have the right to show things, have the right to keep things closed. So don't be afraid to say what you think. If your time was not happy, or if there were things you were not happy about, I'm very happy to hear that. More generally, all sorts of ephemera is welcome. Theatre programmes, dinner menus, it's all grist to my mill. And terrible things like photographs. We have a pretty wretched set of photographs in college. We don't have a complete run of freshers' photos, and those we do have often have no names on it. So it's one thing to say about the freshers of this year, but I've no idea who they are. So even if just to be able to look at an old freshers' photograph and say, well, I know all these people, I will give you their names, that helps, because a photograph with no identification is almost valueless. So there are many different ways.
Thank you, Robin. And I mean, one other thing that our listeners won't know is that Robin has also been pioneering something called DigiSafe, which is a digital archival resource. And so partly what we're also working on is how to archive and think about digital materials in the future. So it may be that the materials that you're putting together will be in a digital format, and we have thought about how to look after them, or at least Robin and his colleagues have. So let me, on everyone's behalf, and it's there in the chat, thank the wonderful editors and authors, some of whom aren't with us today, for this fantastic book and the opportunity to talk about it. That I've learned so much from listening to you and obviously from reading the text. And so those of you that haven't got it yet, I strongly encourage you to go out there. Oh, look, they're being waited. So if any of you would like at this point, one of the things I think that's very nice, if you're able to turn your cameras on, and so we can see your faces a little bit in this final moment of thanks and appreciation. Look at that. I think that's just joyous. Thank you everyone for joining us today, and thanks particularly again to Felicity, Richard, Colin and Robin. Thank you. Bye-bye.